Hi, I'm Bess Ho, the moderator. Welcome to our investment panel. I would like to introduce Edward King, VP of New Ventures of Inventec Corporation. Edward has launched over 25 new products that achieve 1 billion in revenues over a 20-year period by champion market analysis, building successful cross-functional and multicultural teams and directing product launches. We have a very nice chat about your background as a corporate venture investing in early stage seed,
Right,
pre-A, and sometimes Series A technology startup for the hardware sector. And your
right,
free member team, including your CFO, is tasked to find strategic investment to align your ODM business. Inventec is much bigger than JBL and smaller than Foxconn and Flex. But like other corporate ventures, you never lead, but to
right,
follow. We talk about the failure rates, from your Flex experience. From
right.
1,500 hardware startup with seed money, there are only 70 startup you can work with. And from that, less than 1% of, the startup successfully manufacturing the product. And you identify three biggest, failure. First is lack of financial planning.
Right,
Second, founder teams. And third, pricing. Can
right.
you expand that, to our audience, and why did first-time hardware founders always fail? And let's start with financial, then founders and pricing.
Okay. Hey, thanks for having me today. Yeah, when we talked about this, my experience over the last 20 years with hardware startups has been not only on the investment side, but on the manufacturing side. And so the number one problem that we've seen is really lack of financial planning. Hardware is a very expensive game. And a lot of times companies and founders, they only raise money to get them to maybe the next round of financing, or to get them to mass production. And really, it takes more money after you get into production than you think. And this is where we see a lot of hardware startup failure, is because they don't understand the economics of scaling hardware beyond the tens and thousands of something to the millions of something. And they always seem to run out of cash, or cash strapped, or have to go back to markets to find cash, and they have to pause in their production in order to raise capital for that. And it's very disastrous for a company to have to do this kind of thing. Founder teams, the founders that have never done hardware before usually don't succeed, especially if they don't find somebody on their team or hire somebody on their team who has done it before. It's something that it seems like a lot of founders need to kind of pay their dues in the hardware business before. And one of the key things that we see quite often, a lot of hardware companies are very engineering top heavy. And the ones who have been more successful in the beginning, with my experience, are ones that also go out and find people who understand operations. They understand manufacturing, they understand supply chain, they understand fulfillment, and you don't have to hire, as a small startup, you don't have to hire somebody. Go out and find somebody who knows this to advise you, to be on your board of directors. Hire a consultancy so that you understand the economics behind hardware. You understand the processes involved in hardware development, and the whole back end logistics piece is something we call it the value chain. Right? You need to know all parts of the supply chain that add value into your product, and a lot of startups don't understand this out of the gate. Just because you can prototype something doesn't mean you can manufacture it. And so you need somebody to help you with that. And the third one we often see is pricing. So many hardware startups don't understand the price that they need to charge in the market in order to be successful. They design a product and then they decide based on the design, oh, the price for this design is X amount of dollars. Well, that X amount of dollars may never fit into a marketing model. It's usually better to do a top down and a bottoms up for your business to understand what the price point has to be. And you need somebody who really knows marketing in the electronics industry to help you know what price point you need to be successful and how you work to get to that price point.
Yeah, we also mentioned that there's a very good chance that your customer will return your product if your price is very high.
Yeah, and so this is the thing that people never factor in. You'll get returns if the price is high, but you'll get returns anyway, right? And a lot of startups don't think about after sales service. How do we service something after it's sold? The warranty, what kind of warranty do we offer? All right, how much warranty reserve do we have to take on our P&L in order to satisfy that? I mean, I've seen companies just drowned in returns because buyer's remorse, the price is too high, the quality is bad, and it will just sink a company. So you need to understand all of that before you actually launch.
I also want to mention a statistic, shared by another hardware founders who exit, his company, and his last company was on a smart home product, and his product return rate is 70%. Not
Yeah.
because he doesn't have a good product, he has a very good product, but as soon as the customer receive it and they open the box and they find the instruction is something that less friendly, they will box it up and return it. So most of 70% of their return are never used product, not even installed. It was unused and just open the box and ship it right back, and that's
Mhm.
70%.
Yeah, and you notice the companies that are really successful at it. Look at Apple, for example. They spend a lot of time on user experience, on solving a problem, and making it affordable for the kind of customer they're going after. A great example to follow.
Right.
Now we'd
I
like to
can add a
open up
little bit
other
to. Yeah,
panelists.
let me add a little bit about the on the inventory side. So a lot of people really look forward to getting orders from Walmart or Best Buy. They all have very tough terms. 90-day, basically, you have to carry the inventory. They don't pay you until they sell through. So basically, and then they have guaranteed return wherever they don't sell through. So this is another thing that a lot now is a catch-22 because if you get into a Best Buy or Walmart or Target, they can help you to sell a lot, right? Provided you have good quality products that people don't return, but still, it's not guaranteed. And the thing is, do you have the finances to stock 90 days worth of your product into a few of the stores, and then don't get paid, 90 days or longer afterwards when they actually sell your product?
Yeah, and Joseph, I mean, you've been in the manufacturing game. You know that I want to collect after 30 or 60 days, right? And
Yep.
so as a hardware company, you have to factor this in that you may have to pay the manufacturer in 30 to 60 days, but you may not get the payment from the end customer for 90 days. So you have to float this money, and it's very difficult to manage this kind of business, especially if you've never done it before.
Okay, so let me go on to the next question and then we can open up. So we talk about the hardware gross margin, 20 to 30% in order to stay in business. And sometimes, software business have an even thinner margin like hardware, like hot ride sharing startup Uber Lyft. They are making $1, $2, booking fee in each transaction. And those food delivery startup like DoorDash and grocery delivery startup like Instacart are making only $2, $3 service fees. So can you explain what are the most ignored costs by hardware founders?
Yeah, from my experience, a lot of hardware founders and principles in the company have come from maybe the engineering side of a business, right? I left Intel and or I left AMD and I made these products, or I left Apple and I made these products. They had a whole group of people behind them to help them with it. And so they don't understand all the hidden costs in manufacturing. For example, every time I manufacture something for you, I have to test it somehow before I ship it out. But I need to rely on you to help me with the test equipment, to help rely on you to help me with what do I need to test, right? And then you need to figure out a warranty. If I offer a year warranty, how many of these am I going to get back? How do I service a warranty? How, firmware. Firmware costs can be outrageous sometimes, especially if you go to a third party to do the firmware. And there's always hidden costs in manufacturing. The one that is hardest for people to understand, if I manufacture for you, um, and we do it on a regular basis and ship you regularly, I'm actually acquiring a lot of material for you, and you don't pay for that until I ship you a product. However, you, under most contracts, are liable for this material. So you may have outstanding with me several $1 million in material plus 30-day terms. So you need enough money, cash flow, to be cash flow positive and still cover all this liability. And no one ever thinks about this unless you've done it before and
Yeah, and many startup actually didn't aware of the lab tests that you have to do in-house and third-party lab tests that you have to do before you go through the certification and pass, many safety certificates.
Yeah, and it depending on what it is, it can be, FCC is not that expensive anymore. But if you need something else, like in the healthcare industry, right? There's a regulation called IEC 60601 that has to do with equipment in a hospital. This can run you 60 or 70K just to get a certification. So all these things you need to think about and be able to find someone to advise you on this, or it's hidden costs that you never account for when you go to ask money from a VC or another kind of investor.
Yeah, I do like to, bring up when I was working on the hardware products, and many, were not realized that the wake work engine that you use for voice recognition, like Alexa skills and so on, no matter what kind of, voice assistant platform you use, you do have to pay for your own wake work license, and that costs money. That is
Yeah.
not free at all. The only free is, only when you have, 50,000 or, 100,000 unit production, and maybe Amazon will make an exception because you are a business partner and they will waive, the fee. Otherwise, starting out, you have to pay your own WakeWork engine license. So I like your advice on hardware founders should pitch, CM at the same time when they pitch to investor. Your manufacturer works with hardware startup even in the alpha stage. You mentioned you don't decide based on MOQ, stand for, minimum ordering quantity, and it's
Right.
about revenue size and factory
Yeah.
utilization. And this is very encouraging for founders. Can you share the average funding amount hardware founders should prepare and raise to cover manufacturing and timing, and what happened to supply chain and logistic and shipping this year?
Yeah. From my experience doing this for a number of years, hardware, just to get you into production, you should budget $5 to $10 million, depending on what it is. And you need to find a manufacturer at the same time you're looking for a VC, so that you can factor all of this into your financial plan for when you do go out and look for funding. Otherwise, you're going to catch yourself short somewhere. And Inventec may be different. Some companies do look at like MOQ, but they give you an MOQ because they need a certain revenue. And so I don't really tell people I need an MOQ. I just need like a certain revenue number over a certain number of months. And part of this is to help plan inside our factory utilization. As a manufacturer, I want to make sure my stuff is my equipment is used 100% of the time. And so uh, I I need your help to help me with that internally. Otherwise, we'll both be caught short sometime. When you need something manufactured and my factory utilization at that time may be 100% or 90 something percent. So we need to work together for that. Let's see, what were some of the other questions? Oh, timing. So this is the other one I find quite interesting in the hardware startup community. From when you have, I'll call it kind of like a beta unit, a minimum viable product. It sometimes takes people 9 months to a year before they can get to mass production. And some of it is what you talked about with Jackie at the very beginning, and what Jackie's trying to do is help people cut down on this time by engaging manufacturers up front to help them with their design or help look at their design. We call it design for manufacturing, design for manufacturing, design for test, design for supply chain, so that we can cut down this 9 to 12 months by some. So always budget that kind of stuff. And you know, if you follow the news now in hardware, there's chip shortages, there's component shortages, there's commodity shortages all over the place right now. And if you're a startup right now, you should be planning for that. You should be making sure that you have finances in place to actually put orders in now for materials, or you may be pushed way out. I've seen lead times now that are hitting 40 to 52 weeks on some components. That's a year from now to get some stuff. And then because of COVID, we've had some logistics hiccups this year. A lot of people used to airlift product from Asia to the US, but a lot of that was carried on commercial flights. Since commercial flights have dropped, the logistics for air have also been cut. And so it's more expensive to ship. And because of COVID, a lot of docks in the US have been running skeleton crews to keep socially distanced. And for a while, we just watched the pileup outside of Long Beach of all these containers coming from Asia that couldn't dock. People couldn't get their product. So these are the things as a hardware startup that you have to look at. It's just not your product. It's how do you make it and how do you get it somewhere and the current situation.
Yeah, I'd like to mention that we were working on a sensor called Ambient light sensor that tell how bright the room is, and we were using one or two brands of manufacturer. And by the time we are planning on the alpha, it turns out that the early design we can't use the same brand, and we keep saying that what happened to the part we cannot order, and it say end of life, and then we keep running into several brands and manufacturer that the same sensor, they actually end of life, means that if you order now you might get the last batch, but if you don't order now you will never get it, and the only inventory you can find maybe is on DigiKey distributor, but it's very small quantity, only good enough maybe for a very small batch, and also not good, it's not enough for manufacturer. So when you design, you really have to look at the supplier, the part, and you have to have a very good strong relationship with manufacturer.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd like to mention, the geopolitical nature of things now. It used to be that a hardware manufacturer could say, well, okay, I'll do this, and then I'll just go to China and I can get good labor rates and I can just churn out huge volume. But that's not true anymore. You have to pay attention to the tariff schedule coming in from China. It can be anywhere from 7.5% to 25% on products. And so not only do you need to look at this, but you also need to look to diversify your manufacturing base, maybe outside of of China and look to other parts of Asia or Mexico or even sometimes Eastern Europe. And this should play into all your plans for funding, is figuring out this kind of tariff and where you're going to manufacture and the cost structure for that you need it for to manufacture, and bake that into your plans.
Yeah, that exactly go to your financial planning, because if you don't actually plan well for your gross margin, and the tariff, just eat up all your profit. I would like to introduce our panelist, Jay Nam, Managing Partner of GFT Ventures. Jay is a VC with 20 years of extensive investment experience. Jay co-founded Translink Capital, a Palo Alto-based early-stage VC firm. He lead investment in AI, fintech, blockchain, and consumer technology. Prior to Translink, Jay was the managing director of Samsung Ventures. His portfolio includes 5 IPOs and 5 M&A. Jay started his VC career at Vertex Management, Singapore-based VC arm of an investment firm. His portfolio includes PayPal. Jay received an MBA from Stanford University, a MS BS in chemistry from Seoul National University. Jay served as a chairman and board director of Asia American Multi-Technology Association, AAMA. Jay is also an active angel investor and advisor to many startups. You have a long list of impressive exit and IPOs. Can you explain your secret as a lead investor, and you go by a work checklist or Excel number crunching models?
No. So, by the way, Edward, thank you for sharing those details. Being an investor in some of these hardware companies, you actually tend to neglect all those additional cost items and details that the entrepreneur should be well aware of, and it's actually always great to hear that reminder. Bess, thank you first of all for inviting me to this opportunity. In terms of investments, it's very flattering that the things that you said, it's actually not necessarily true. And some of the companies that you listed up in your presentation as successes were actually not successes, where some of the companies failed and we lost money on. But I think in general, and this is not just for the hardware category, excuse me, but in general, I think the things that I've concluded over my 20 years of investing that I look for, again, you look for all the basics, right? So you look for the market opportunity, you make sure the technology and the product is the right fit, you make sure the team is solid. But for me, the most important element among all of those is really, at the end of the day, the founder, the entrepreneur. And for the entrepreneur, a long list of attributes are important, but for me, almost the most important thing for me that I've learned over time is somebody that has raw intelligence in abundance, somebody that you meet and are immediately impressed by their intelligence, their understanding of the market, the problem statement, and the approach that they're taking to solve that problem. And so on the basis of raw intelligence, the second level is problem solving skills. No individual, I think, can be brilliant at everything. And so at the end of the day, the founder needs to supplement with other people that can bring different skill sets and experiences that the founder obviously doesn't have. And that's a problem, right? So solving, the ability to solve that problem, the ability to identify the issue, find the solution, those are all problem solving skills. And I think the entrepreneur on a daily basis is constantly problem solving. So somebody that has demonstrated the ability to problem solve, I think, is important. And then finally, if the founder actually has what I would call charm and the attractiveness to almost has a magnetism where people are drawn to this person. And that's important because at the end of the day, a business is really built upon two pillars. One is people, the other is capital. And the ability for an intelligent founder that has problem solving skills, but also has the charm and the vision and the charisma to attract other people to join them for the journey. And as an investor, those are the people that I'm naturally attracted to. I'm curious how this particular individual is going to solve this issue and actually execute on what they're trying to do. And that's when I actually want to get involved as an investor to participate in that journey with that founder.
Echo Jay's point. So when you do a startup, it's a team sport. It's no longer a singles match for tennis. So it's all about the team. And why Jay mentioned about charisma is the founder has the charisma to attract and persuade co-founders. So oftentimes it's very difficult to be a single founder of a startup company, right? So a lot of the mentors will advise, find a co-founder with complementary skills. Don't have two business guys, don't have two engineers, because you want to have complementary skills so that you can cover more of the business functions. And how you talk to somebody who's given up a job at well-paying job at Apple, Facebook, Google, to take basically at the beginning, probably like a non-salary job with your startup, because they believe in your vision. So that's very important.
Okay, so we have a good chat about in your last 20 years, you have the ability to spot winner founders in your first meeting and sometime in the first 30 to 60 minutes. And that's make you one of the best winner detectives, in the VC world. Most founder pitching you reach that Series A is outstanding smart entrepreneurs. How do you go on to pick the smartest and the best of the smart founders? And you mentioned it comes down to two critical elements. Can you explain it?
Well, first of all, I will categorically deny that, I'm the best at doing that. I've just been doing it longer. It's one of those things where, yeah, I play golf, and I'm decent because I've been playing it for 20 years. But, there's golfers that are, in their early teens or 7 or 8 years old that are just brilliant at what they do. I think at the end of the day, what I will say is that, over time, you build a certain level of pattern recognition, right? So you build a database, because if you think about it, on an average day in the life of a VC, you're trying to meet, let's say, a couple of companies a day, right? And in a week, that's 10 companies. In a year, that's 500 companies. And, if you do that for 20 years, that's a lot of companies. That's 1,000 companies that you'll meet. And if you meet 1,000 companies, 1,000 founders, at some point, you'll develop a certain level of pattern recognition. The same way that if you play golf for 20 years, even though my swing is a mess, I'll somehow be able to make contact, right? And so when you ask me about how I'm able to identify, well, first of all, depending on the sector and the problem they're trying to solve, the different backgrounds and experiences are all going to vary, right? But the commonality that I was trying to point to earlier is that it doesn't matter if the startup is a semiconductor startup or a device company or even a gaming or an app company. There is the founder with that raw intelligence that can articulate very convincingly why this is a relevant problem they're trying to solve and articulate the solution that makes sense, right? And then, finally, as I said, having the ability and the charm and the charisma to attract, the team around him as well as investors. Because at the end of the day, if you really think about it, what's the most important survival skill for a startup? The only reason that a startup fails is because they run out of cash. And, I've seen founders that have the uncanny ability, even with a product launch failure, even with massive customer complaints, even with, management team issues, that because they're so good at what they do in terms of sharing the vision and convincing investors, that they have multiple shots on goal. And that's a skill. One of the things that I will say specifically about hardware, I think we all know and understand that hardware is very capital intensive, right? We talked about this best over the phone. You know, it's probably another order of magnitude in terms of cost to actually develop a product. It's another order of magnitude to actually take it to market. It's another order of magnitude to mass produce over software, comparisons, right? And so the ability to be able to fundraise, in my opinion, is one of the most important skills, especially more so for hardware entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jay.
Anyone want to add? Now you explain hardware startup are much harder because it takes 5 million to run a hardware campaign, more than 10 million to launch a hardware product, and eventually you will need, somewhere 100 million over time. And software only needs, 500,000 to reach a beta, less than 2 million to launch a software product. And less than 1% of hardware startups solve the right problem, target a big enough market, and have the right team. Can you share, the extra quality that a hardware founders need, and what are the hurdles hardware founders have to overcome?
Yes, I think I've already answered the question before you asked the question. And that one thing, again, I'll iterate, is the ability to attract capital. If you're in the hardware space and you can't raise funding, or you don't enjoy raising funding, it's anybody that's on the top quartile of the skill and will to fundraise, if you're not there as a hardware entrepreneur, forget it. Don't even start.
Okay, that's very good for the audience to really think about what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think King mentioned I think it was discussed earlier by Edward, like, there's certain founders that maybe are engineers or product types, and I've actually worked with entrepreneurs that have amazing product expertise, built beautiful products. One particular one that I'm still very sore about is a company called Teforia. This was a tea brewing machine. I still have one at home. I'm a big tea fan. It's an amazing product and it's beautiful. The problem is, if the founder is, a great product person and whatnot, but doesn't enjoy fundraising, doesn't like talking to entrepreneurs or promoting the product, then at some point that's going to be a problem. And ultimately, the company will fail because you run out of cash.
Yeah. I love that product, Jay, by the way.
Yeah, it's my,
But I
don't even get me started.
I talked to that guy about manufacturing, and you're exactly right. He good product could never really fundraise,
Yeah.
The other thing, Jay, that I find, some founders can take a company so far, but then they need to hire like a chairman or a CEO that can actually get them to that next round of funding. And so they need to work with their VC partners to try to maybe find this one person that can help them get to that next level of funding. I see this quite often.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, having said that, I'll give you a counter example to my own example. Okay. So there's one particular founder that I know really well. I didn't end up investing in a company. Unfortunately, I invested in a competing company in the same category. And I regret it because I would have made far more money if I invested in Fitbit. And Fitbit, if you know James Park, he's actually an introvert. He's not a big fan of meeting people in general, let alone pitching to investors. So for a founder like that, what do you need to do? Well, you need to actually have a product that is so unique and new to the market, and execute really, really well with a great team. Then the numbers speak for themselves. So they were never after they launched, they were so successful, they were never dependent on external funding. They raised capital because they needed to grow faster, but they didn't need to raise capital to survive. And so you can either be so good at what you're doing in terms of product market fit, execution, and whatnot, that your business is growing so rapidly that people are going to throw money at you. But most cases, you typically need second and third chances, because to get it perfectly right on the first go is such a rarity. And that's why the ability to raise capital is so important.
Hey, Jay, I have a question for you about founders. So one of the things when I talk to founders, I always ask them about their emotional involvement, right? And um, I've met founders who will ride it into the ground because they're emotionally tied to this company. And so these are the companies I kind of shy away from doing business with. I rather have a founder who's passionate about his business, but he knows what his limits are and he knows when to get out. How do you feel about this kind of founder?
You know what? That's a really, really interesting question. And I'm just thinking back in terms of the founders. You know, I think a lot of the obsessive founders, the positive is, they'll never give up, they'll keep going. But what I've also found is the downside to those kind of founders is that they have a really hard time letting go and delegating.
Yes.
Right. And so if you think about a personality trait where they're kind of obsessive to a point where, they're never going to give up, is a positive. But what that also means is that they're probably going to micromanage, never delegate. And it's very difficult to build a strong team around those kind of founders. And so, again, going back to, what I said earlier about what I look for is, if somebody is really, really smart beyond being obsessive and understands their limits and weaknesses and has the ability to identify, what gaps to fill and has the ability to attract these people, those are the companies that I think have been more successful. Again, case in point to James at Fitbit. I mean, he supplemented himself with a very, very experienced and strong management team that did all the external bound communication, talk to investors and whatnot. And he was smart enough to understand what his weaknesses are and what his strengths were.
Yeah, my company happens to manufacture some of those, right? And I can tell you, the operations people he hired.
Oh, top notch, right?
World-class, top-notch operations people. He was smart enough to go out and find them.
To work with us in Molecule. That's why they're doing so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we should talk about Molecule someday, you and I, Jay.
You probably know more about what actually is happening than I do.
Yeah, maybe.
Actually, a good example is Google, right? Where Eric Schmidt was brought in as the outside CEO over Larry and Sergey, right? And they were okay because they still have controlling interests of the company, even though, and I think they realized they were just still on the learning path to be a professional executives running a multi-billion-dollar company that Eric had experienced at Sun Microsystem and then turned around Novell. And then I think, I mean, it would be a whole different story if they hung on to to Google and to say they wanted to continue to run it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of founders, the ones that I've been attracted to in the past, they've also been teachable. So that when somebody says to them, hey, maybe you should look at this or that, they can pause and look at it and really take it under advisement. And so, these are the kinds of founders that I look for when I do an investment deal or manufacture for somebody.
Well, let's
add to Jay's point a little bit. Sometimes I think we also have to look at the different cycle of the technology evolutions, right? So why software takes a lot less capital these days? Think about .com days, not too long ago, 20 years ago, right? Most of the .com company, Pets.com, webvan, they raised tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars because there was no cloud. They had to build their own server. They had to host it. They had to write their own software. So software was expensive until the cloud became available. And then next thing you know, you got iOS and Android. Oh, I got the two platforms. I don't have to write to proprietary operating system. I could just build on Android and iOS, and they cover 99% of the market share, right? On the hardware side, I think it's difficult to have that kind of dynamic shifts but it is getting that way because a lot of the design, especially in sensors, they have been shrunk down to so small that companies can actually do modules, integrating different sensors together and build wearable device, IoT devices that they would have to spend a lot more money to do core R&D in the past. So I think there is still opportunity for the hardware side of the company to to find the right problem. The main thing is the problem big enough to attract customers, right? Investors, not investors and customers.
I would like to introduce our panelists. Joseph Wan, Managing Director of Technology Ventures Group. Prior, he was the founding partner of Lab 360, a startup incubator. Joseph led enterprise business and corporate development at Inventec, NEC, Silicon Graphics, and DEC. Both were acquired by HP. He mentored startup at Plug and Play, Alchemist Accelerator, and Women's Startup Lab. Joseph received his BS in WE from Tufts University. He's a board member of IEEE Consumer Electronics Society and chairman emeritus for the Silicon Valley section. Many hardware startups joined Lab 360 are coming from well-known incubator, TechStar 500, Skydeck. What do you have to do to correct these hardware startup in order to put them in the right manufacturing track?
Let me answer it a little bit differently. This is not just manufacturing track. So one of the things, I think Lab 360 was founded from scratch in 2014. Literally for the first 3 months, we didn't have any applicants because nobody knew us. We had an office, so we gave away free office for companies to come in, and we have a little lab when we start buying equipment, 3D printers, laser cutter, and say, oh, we have free equipment too, so they can start doing prototypes. And excuse me. And one thing we need to, especially we have a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, so there's a lot of basic stuff that they need to understand now, how to, simple as how to structure a company, right? You have two co-founders, 50-50 split. Okay, that's very good. But what happens if your two co-founders have a disagreement? How do you break the tie? So do you want to register in California, Nevada, or most of the time, some of them didn't even know. I mean, if you want to go IPO route, then you must register in Delaware. Term sheet, when you get the first investment. I think SafeNote came out. Yeah, SafeNote already came out. So, but it was relatively new in 2014. There's convertible note, SafeNote. So we chose those startups actually coming out of the other programs because they were already trained on some of the basic stuff. So a lot of them just don't understand. It's like what Edward mentioned about, building a product, and especially a lot of them are trained on software. I just take a Raspberry Pi, I build something on top, and now I'll create, I'll go and pitch to some customer, and then we do pilot and all that stuff. Yeah, it's good for proof of concept. And also remember, Kickstarter and Indiegogo kind of started a few years before 2014. So you have platforms to raise, for example, Pebble raised $10 million, right? But you really have to understand on the hardware side, there's it's not double of knowledge you need to understand to do a startup, because on the one hand, doing a pure software, you have a lot of tools, and literally we have how we met best, you and I, right? Hackathon weekends, 48 hours, right? And in 48 hours we can sketch up some really good demo and pitch on stage and raise and get some prize money at the time in 2007 and 2008. But on the hardware side, I think there was one group that tried it, and I was helping a little bit. And luckily, we had Fry's, which ended up now is no longer around. So the team spending more time going back and forth to buy parts rather than you just sit down and keep coding, right? So I think the thing about doing hardware for young entrepreneurs, I think they need to get more experienced people on the advisory board or mentors. There's somebody in the audience, Hamid. I know he's a serial entrepreneur. I mean, he's done many stuff before. He used to work for Maxim. I know him because he first came on and I recognize him. So he's doing the startup, but he has a lot of experience already. He knew what chip to use. As simple as sometimes chip platforms. So why Apple and sometimes big company cannot come up with the latest and greatest technology in the product? Because they need to anticipate the volume. When you ship 400 iPhones a year or more, can your supply chain actually produce that many components that fill your production needs, right? If you use the state of the art of some sensor and chip, they might have limitations, just like Ed was saying earlier. If it has 40 weeks lead time, then you can never fulfill your ramp up. That's a major difference between, I think, doing a pure software mobile app versus, I wouldn't say people should focus on hardware. I think you should focus on the problem first. It's just hardware has always been able to play a piece in making the solution much more convenient, or has special medical devices, right? You cannot write software and run on somebody and say that will cure your problem. So usually it's a glucose meter, a pacer, or the other type of medical devices. So it's a combination of software and hardware. So when these companies startup came to Lab 360, we pair them up with also mentors to try to get them to make sure that initial businesses is vetted well, so that they can go on the right path. Because startup always exact. They always have to pivot to wherever the right model after they try out. This model works, this model doesn't work. But the thing is, how far do you pivot left and right, and still making forward progress? So if you don't have to go too far off and kind of keeping a narrow path that you are still moving forward quickly, then I think the money will last much longer and allow you to be more successful.
Yeah, another question is, I like your honest discipline to get these hardware startup to transform into hardware as a service. But during this process, what do you find the most common hardware startup common mistake they make?
Common mistakes. It really varies. I think a lot of it, I think that Edward already touched upon, is the overall preparation, the financial preparation. Hardware as a service, it's kind of a term because software as a service was made very popular because of mainly because Salesforce spun off of Oracle and became very successful. But if you think about hardware as a service, we had that model by AT&T back 50 years ago. When you have a home phone, when you have a line for your home telephone at home, it comes with a phone, right? But you have to pay $50 for the AT&T to have a phone line in your home. And then if you want an extension phone, then you pay extra for this extension phone, right? So hardware as a service is a model basically to help the hardware companies so that they can actually produce recurring revenue. Because when you make a good product, you want it to last for a long time. Then why would the same customer come back and buy more if the product lasts for a long time? But now a lot of people figured out it's not about the physical hardware product, it's the data the product collected or the analytic insight that the hardware produced that allows them to do to take advantage of their solution. So hardware as a service. So there's one startup. They came out of Alchemist called PubInno. So it stands for Pub Innovation. Very interesting. They actually turned a mechanical turning beer tap, which basically most of the time you go to a bar or a restaurant and ask the bartender how much beer is left in that keg of Heineken or Coors Light or Miller Lite. They have no idea because they just pour until it runs out, right? But they actually convert that into an electronic flow meter. So you push the button and say, this is a 12-ounce mug or 16-ounce mug, and then it just pour by itself and minimize foam. And then they have a very accurate count of how much beer is left, and they can pre-order before the beer runs out.
That's very good to know. Anyone like to share before I move to Jane?
Yeah, the one thing that Joseph said that kind of resonated with me, you don't know how many companies show up on my doorstep and they've prototyped something using a Raspberry Pi. And I have to explain to them that I can't manufacture that. I don't own the rights to Raspberry Pi. And we need to start over if you really want to do something, right? And so, yeah, a lot of what Joseph said about that resonated with me as a hardware manufacturer. Yeah, the one thing that Joseph said that kind of resonated with me, you don't know how many companies show up on my doorstep and they've prototyped something using a Raspberry Pi. And I have to explain to them that I can't manufacture that. I don't own the rights to Raspberry Pi. And we need to start over if you really want to do something, right? And so, yeah, a lot of what Joseph said about that resonated with me as a hardware manufacturer.
I'd like to introduce our panelists. Jane Jean, founding partner of Vectors Angel. Jane started Vectors Angel in 2019 to enable collaboration between like-minded impact-focused companies and investors. She's an investment manager with Goldwine Innovation Capital, a clean tech program manager at UC Berkeley, and president of Energy Innovation Network. She holds a MS from Cornell University on Sustainable Design Studies and MS in Energy System Engineering from University of Toronto. So Jane, I understand your fund invests in seed, pre-A, and even Series A, depending on many factors. Can you share with our audience why you list three most important criteria? Number one is founders and team. Second is impact. Third is exit strategy.
Yeah, so I want to make it very clear that we're not a typical fund. We're angel group that we focus on impact investing. And the two areas we're looking at, first is sustainability, and the second area is healthcare. So when we look at the company, is first we look into the problem they're actually solving. Are they actually having an impact on their sector and a positive impact in the society? So that's number one thing we take a look at. If we don't think that fall into our category, we don't consider them in our investment. And for that reason, we believe our money will be making the most impact at the earlier stage, pre-seed or seed level. Because for Series A, we think angel investors' money does not make as much impact as seed stage or pre-seed anymore. And also angel investors, they were willing to take higher risk, but with a decent return as well. So that's why the number one thing we're looking at, if the company even fit into every category area, and the bigger the impact the company having in one industry, it often means that they're actually solving the problem and the market is big for them. And the second thing we're looking at is really the founder and the team. I think many of our panelists have already talked about the founders, their charisma, the way they get things done are super important. But I do have another perspective I want to share. So I work in UC Berkeley to incubate or accelerate university technology spin out for quite some time. And those technology founders or deep tech founders, sometimes they have no charisma. They're super nerdy and they're not interesting at all. They get into the accelerator incubator program. They're just like having their hat on to develop their technology to make it work. Or the thing they're working on, many of them they need to at least validate their technology work in the lab, and then they can move their product from the lab to market. So this type of technology, you're not really expecting 100 times X exit. It doesn't happen. Those companies, however, are pretty good acquisition target for big technology companies. So the return multiples are relatively lower for this type of companies. So when we look at in this kind of B2B technology company, the first thing we're really looking at is who is going to acquire this type of company. And then by doing that, we're obviously calculating the return multiples. And those companies, I think they are really critical to enable a lot of the technology innovations and make it work. I want to just make a quick note about the Nest thermostat acquired by Google for $3.2 billion. It's actually one of the company in our clean tech or sustainability area that we think that's achieving the highest return ever. That's because they're not really considered as a hardware company. They're considered as a software company, as a potential door, like open potential door for Google into smart homes. However, that was the story you hear before they get acquired is like, oh, 6 years they get such a high valuation, bought into Google. But the second half of the story many people don't know is that after they got into Google, they really didn't produce the kind of market traction that Google wanted. So the department got folded into Google hardware. So from the many perspective, I think the acquisition was not as successful as Google hoped, and they overpaid for this company. But again, the company really having high valuation is because they have a software component, but they're using hardware as a way to get into people's store, and they keep on selling software on top of the hardware. Yeah, and as you mentioned, the hardware companies have pretty high risk. So everything's about a risk and reward. You do a calculation. If you think the risk and reward match up, then you invest. If you believe the reward is too low, but the risk is too high, then you pass on the company, or tell them to find like foundation money to support their way. Not everything's venture backable. So we ask the founder to ask himself, what do you want to do with the company? What is the lifestyle you want? Why are you jumping into venture money if you don't have to go to the venture path? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of, cover my second question, but I'm going to repeat it, so audience can actually, learn. So out of the few dozen founders I work with, we have the most discipline to focus on designing the startup exit on day one. Most of the founders are so afraid of bringing up the exit strategy to investor on the first meeting. And why would you want them to include it in the fundraising deck and also make it as part of your due diligence? I think these are, things that, it will be very helpful for founders to understand it.
Every single fund do their return calculation. What is the exit strategy for this potential company? It is a thing that every single fund does a calculation. That's what the limited partner for every single fund are looking at. How are you getting me like 30% IRR for the fund return? So you better calculate your exit multiple carefully before you're putting money into every single company. The founders one question: what do you want to do with the company? What do you want to do down the road? Do you want to like really go big, or you want to like exit halfway? Or that's all the discussions are willing to listen or hear from the founder, because I think the exit timeline is also important. If you exit too early, then the return multiple sometimes slower. You return later, but if you're like, okay, you're giving up this acquisition opportunity and you wait for a few years, maybe you don't find that kind of like acquisition opportunities anymore. So it's really case by case. What is the right timing to exit the company? If a founder is telling you I'm exiting the company next year, or or the year after, it doesn't really hit the return hurdle that typical VC want. So if the founder just want to exit super early, sometimes it works well for angel investors. To be honest, we take a look at those companies who want to exit early, especially in the medical space. They do get bought out, in a couple of years after they pass FDA. That's kind of the path they take, and you don't have linger angel investors' money forever. But this type of deal may not be super exciting for VCs because you're not getting the super high multiple that your LP want to balance off a portfolio. Yeah, so every single founder need to think about their exit strategy as it's a part of the homework, the VC deal anyway.
So any tips on where to raise, the first round or find a hardware lead investor?
I'll start. I think before you start talking to any investors, the benefit of being a hardware startup in this day and age where you have crowdfunding platforms is to actually generate some market data and show some interest from your potential customers. And you can do a campaign, not necessarily to raise capital, but to actually gather the data to show demand. This is what Sunny Vu, the founder of Misfit, did really well. He actually ran a crowdfunding campaign, and he limited it to a small number of units, a small dollar amount, but he was able to show like a 10x oversubscription and whatnot, and that's what actually got a lot of folks interested early on. You can also do the same thing. The founders of Molecule did the same thing, where they actually had a lot of interest. They penetrated interest groups with allergy symptoms and asthma categories, and they created a long wait list of people that were interested in purchasing the product before the product was even available. So my advice to the founders would be, if there is a way to actually show some proof that there's demand in the market and show some data before you even have that first meeting with the investor, chances are that investor meeting is going to go a lot better.
That's very helpful. Any advice on the best way to how to approach hardware or hard tech VCs or funds?
You start with angel investing. There are a lot of angel investors willing to talk to you if you're looking for your first check and actually see the product, because angel investors at the earlier stage, they invest based on their own personal interest. They like this product, they may just give you money for you to get it started. At the same time, really build out your product, show market data. Then it will be a good time to talk to institutional VCs with your data.
Can you go a little bit further? Because, most of the founders are very shy and they want to find out, should I buy a database or should I just, capture your email, from AngelList and, somehow find your email in public spaces and email you out of the blue? Would be the best, way that you feel is warm, that you will actually listen and, open up to this founder?
So we take a lot of referrals. So the companies we invested in, if they make a referral, we take it more seriously. It's just a lot of the founders, they directly submit that to to us. We talk to them, and then many of those founders, they are not really ready. Their product is still like very shaky. Their idea is not very clear. Their product market fit is also not clear. However, we tell them, okay, you go this direction until you're ready to raise fund. I think at early stage, the founder also need to hear a lot of feedbacks, especially when they're just getting started. They may not even know what they're doing. They need to hear from the market to give them feedback on what they should be doing.
Yeah, so I do agree that, the founders should not wait until, they feel it's ready. They should actually, get to a certain milestone, and they should start, asking the friend to make intro or find some way to meet investor in some common place, uh, and to get some early feedback, because then you know what to work on.
So let me add a little bit, because I've been giving this talk to a number of first-time entrepreneurs. So um, uh, during the dot-com days, pretty much you get some friends and family and then jump to Series A. But nowadays, it seems like because we have the crowdfunding side, we have a bunch of angel investors, but always start out with this bootstrapping. I mean, um, you cannot come in and say, I got a full-time job. I want to do this part-time, and I want some angel, some investment so that I can, take it further, so I can build out a prototype or something. You have to add or time or other type of things first, and then you go out to your friends and family, right? Because angel investors, a lot of times, Jane was saying, they will take a meeting, but they also have their criteria. So um, oftentimes they use referrals, because a lot of the person referred, we have a history with that person. We know they understand what we're looking for. They're not just going to randomly introduce, Joe Schmo to come to me and kind of waste 1 hour of my time because they have no prototype. They're just looking for some money so that they can do that like a part-time pet project, right? Also try to plan it out, I would say 6 months to a year before you actually commit to do your startup, and network with the right people in that network to build the connections, right? Because a lot of times, you might have a good idea, but is that an idea that going to really take off now to a fundable idea? Because a lot of you, again, I don't know when I said this, maybe this before we start this webinar, is the challenge for Silicon Valley, coming to Silicon Valley to raise fund, is we have the most amount of VC funding of any part of the world, 3 times more than the second city in the United States. But on the other hand, we have a lot of homegrown competitors in startups. So recently I actually helping some of the startup actually from Pop actually is a team from Turkey. Now they're no longer in San Francisco after they graduate from Alchemist. So a lot of them want to come from France, UK, Turkey, Korea, Japan, Taiwan to come to Silicon Valley to raise funds. And I often tell them it's very challenging, because we have the most amount of VC money, but then everybody comes to Silicon Valley. In addition to, we have American startup entrepreneurs to compete with. So think it through. I mean, if you really want to do a startup and you want to raise some funding, I think you have to do some pre-planning before just say, hey, I have a good idea and let's go out and start fundraising and get some introduction. So there are 2 types of investors, and I think a lot of the panelists will agree, right? There's smart money and there's dumb money. Somebody has so much money, they don't care. They will just like, hey, well, let's say if you are an investor at Zoom, right? You're sitting on $100 million or Bitcoin, right? Sitting on $100 million, you're 35 years old. What are you going to do with the money, right? So you're going to help your friend. Here's 10K, 50K, try it. Because to them, they're helping a friend. But can they add value, right? But when you get smart money, these are the experienced angel investors, and they actually have find the right ones who have gone through your path, gone through your industry technology. They will add a lot more value. Their value is a lot more about the advice they give you rather than just the money they provide you.
Yeah, about hardware, I would suggest, founders would not just, stay in the Silicon Valley and just raise. And, for hardware, you should actually go where the money is. There's a lot of hardware invested in LA, Southern California, and also, in Midwest, Chicago and New York, East Coast area. So don't just stay around, just, reach out, to a lot of investors. In fact, because of the good exit on the East Coast and New York area, the hardware is very active on hardware. So the U.S., China trade war and COVID-19 pandemic caused big disruption on the supply chain, logistics, shipment. Many parts, go from 4 to 8 weeks time to 52 weeks. I'm sharing my own experience when I prepare, the hardware logistic. I have to prepare the product assembly locally for tackling market and local sales. So can you share your insight?
Yeah, I think you need to find somebody who's experienced in this. The experience is the most important thing. And so if you don't have experience in it, find somebody who does to help you navigate this. And it doesn't you don't need to hire them. There's many consultancies that you can reach out to that will help you with manufacturing or operations or logistics. That can contracts is another big one that a lot of first-time hardware people don't understand contracts when it comes to hardware, what you're liable for, what you have to deliver, what they have to deliver. So to be flexible, you need to find somebody who's been around the block a few times and has a couple of broken bones and black eyes to kind of help you navigate it. And it's even more important now than it has been in the past.
Now, so when it comes to exit strategy and execution plan, how do you advise founder what to do and about the timing? Because a lot of founders, does not really think about it and they don't plan ahead.
All right, I'll take a crack at it. Yeah, I mean, Jane mentioned about it's not something that the founder should really focus a lot time and effort on, because it's something that they can only control by delivering results. So progress and result that they have performed, they can actually drive become attractive acquisition targets. But they cannot plan it out and say, oh, I really want to sell to Apple, I really want to sell to Facebook in 5 years. They cannot make that determination. Medical device, as Jim mentioned, historically, a lot of them never really get out to IPO. I mean, it just takes too long, right? So, and a lot of big medical companies, medical device companies, will scoop them up before they got too big. So you have to understand a little bit about your exit strategy, because like Jane mentioned before, as a general partner of a fund, the investment, when you do the due diligence before you make the investment, you have to kind of make some assumption about if you want to target a company to be acquired, and then founders say, basically, I'm going to run this company until forever. So then that it's not a good match, right? So those are kind of things that you need to determine. But other than that, I would just say, figure out a couple exit scenarios and just focus on execution. Tell your investor what you're going to do at what time and deliver what results, and then surprise them by overachieving the results. And if you deliver that kind of performance, then good things will happen.
So software needs about 6 months cash flow to execute a workable M&A plan with the right outside agent. So what about the hardware startup or deep tech? Do they have to also take longer or more effort to do that?
Yeah, they're going to need more effort, because you rely on a whole supply chain and a manufacturer. And so the negotiation between you and your manufacturer and maybe an acquiring company can be a long, protracted negotiation about who's responsible for what, who takes over what liability, and it can go on for quite a while. So you need to plan for more than 6 months, for sure.